When you're a fan of visual novels, you learn very quickly that it's never too late for a game to get localised, whereas iconic titles like 428 Shibuya Scramble, Witch on the Holy Night, or the upcoming 1 remake, publishers are increasingly digging into their back catalogues to bring their older visual novel titles over here. Aqua Plus has joined this list of classic developers. On top of the Dungeon Travelers series, which by the way, like all Aqua Plus games, need ports to the Nintendo Switch in order to sell as well as possible, White Album Memories Like Falling Snow, also known as White Album 1, joins this lineup. So it's time to ask, is White Album 1 a good game? And if so, what makes it worth playing? Like a lot of visual novel fans outside Japan, my first experience with the White Album franchise was the fan translation of White Album 2 from Todakanai TL, which came out in December 2021. This sequel became extremely popular not just in Japan, but in the Western visual novel community too, thus White Album 1 gained renewed interest, including attempts by another fan to translate the PC version of the remake. This was also in part because people will reasonably ask, do you need to play White Album 1 to understand White Album 2? Well, the answer is that you don't, but it does feel odd having a second game of a series in English, but not the first. Hence why this official Steam release of White Album Memories Like Falling Snow is deeply welcome. This release of White Album is the remake of the original 1998 visual novel. The original 1998 visual novel was released back when Aqua Plus did Erogi under their mostly retired Leaf brand. It was very different from anything they worked on before, given it was a lot more somber and depressing than the light-hearted Two Heart, and with no Denpa, unlike Kizato and Shizuku, were other iconic titles from the time. Over time, White Album became more popular, leading to the anime adaptation, which got an English release, as well as the remake, now available in English. Originally released for the PS3, and then later ported to the PC under the name White Album Suzu Rareru Fuyu no Owaide, this version completely revamps the presentation and scenario, adds full voice acting, an additional route, as well as taking out the simulation aspects, and of course, the porn too. Also, final side note before moving on, Sting Entertainment assisted with this remake, providing full technical support. Sting is known mainly for their Department Heaven RPG series, but I've also extensively worked with Aqua Plus as well as Idea Factory on various projects, including the Psychedelic Otome games, Fairy Fencer F Refrain Chord, the Utawarimno trilogy, as well as the HD ports of Two Heart 2 and White Album 2. The story of White Album at its core is loyalty versus infidelity. You play as Toya Fuji, a college student who's been dating his girlfriend Yuki Morikawa for a few years now. Yuki is an increasingly popular idol singer, and her popularity, and hence increased workload and time away from Toya, threatens their relationship. As the player, you adopt Toya's perspectives. Your goal is either to stay loyal to Yuki, go through Toya's baggage and repair your relationship, or do you go and find someone else instead? And there are 6 other love interests you can choose from. This is very much a romance-driven adventure set in the real world. If you're coming at this game seeing the name Aqua Plus and are expecting any fantasy elements akin to the Utawarimno or Tears of Tiara series, you won't find that here. Instead, what you will find is a depiction of real-world Japan in the 1990s that explores various themes of the time but are still relevant today. They include Japanese idol culture, the pressures of being a celebrity, work-life balance, and of course, mental health. On a more mundane level, because White Album 1 originally released in 1998, the game reflects society at the time, which shares many striking resemblances to the West as well. It meant things like using landlines to call your friends and receive calls, whether they're from payphones or from your friends' parents, not using mobile phones. Another example includes the lack of widespread internet at that point, where the internet back in the 1990s existed mostly in dial-up form. It also meant receiving paper tickets to shows rather than personal ones. There are many more examples, but in many ways it's a throwback in time to the late 1990s in Japan and indirectly worldwide. If for younger players, it will feel slightly surreal in that respect because you're playing in a society that feels so familiar, but is also very different. You are playing a product of its time. First off, because all official Aqua Plus localizations to date have been RPG hybrids or full-on RPGs, the gameplay will be quite different from those used to these hybrids. The gameplay here instead is much closer to pure visual novels mostly found on PC, so if you're coming from that perspective, you will adjust a lot easier. The gameplay of White Album 1 runs on a timer from November until February. and you go to one location each day. At each location you can talk to a character, and there will be either a major event on each route or a conversation that enables you to raise a stat. The possible stats are small talk, hobbies, entertainment, literature, and romance. You'll need to level up the stats to unlock new conversations down each route. Most of the characters you can talk to are also love interests, but you can also engage with Akira and Eiji, who are two guys. That's a huge missed opportunity for some good old yaoi right there, Akaplus. This loop can get quite repetitive on multiple playthroughs. However, you can skip all text to make it go quicker once you've read the first batch, which means it doesn't outstay its welcome. To give a comparison to another 2023 localization, it handles it a lot better than Jack Jian, a game I've had to temporarily drop for the time being because redoing each route is way too bloody long in that game, whereas here it's much shorter and easier to deal with. To 100% all the conversations and unlock all the achievements will take multiple endings and several different playthroughs, and it will become a bit of a slog. However, if you only want the character endings, there are walkthroughs online that will help you and won't take anywhere near as long. Moving on to the love interests now, and there are a grand total of 7 you can romance in this game. First up is Yuki. She's one of the 2 key heroines in the story and on the key art, as she is the girlfriend of the protagonist Toya Fuji. She's a rising star in the idol world, and is basically this game's version of Setsuna from White Album 2. Dependable, loyal, and possibly out of the protagonist's league. It's generally recommended to play her route first, as it sets up the rest of White Album's world and story nicely. Plus, I do think it fits well as a first route. You do get to understand the dynamics of their relationship, but underpins Toya's feelings of isolation, which are then explored more in other routes. Plus also, Yuki is a great character. Rina is the other main heroine in the story and in the key art. She's Yuki's friendly rival. She's nice and sweet, but has no personal life because of being in the idol world from such a young age. She's extremely talented and is even more popular in the idol world than Yuki. Rina's route is also recommended to play early on, as it feels like the most important cheating route out of every single route in the game. There are also some iconic scenes within this route that remind me a lot of White Album 2, which is a huge win in my book. Now on to the multiple side heroines now. Mana is a high school student that Toya ends up tutoring as one of his part-time jobs. She's trying to get into college and her parents want you to help Mana study for her tests. She is the obligatory cute Tundra character and is one of the most popular heroines outside of the idols in this game. Her situation is quite like Koharu from White Album 2. Something regarding this route I need to make clear as well. You're a guy in college dating a high schooler on top of the already problematic teacher-student dynamic. That said, her route was interesting to experience and has some of the best drama, so her route is worth reading. Misaki is the very sweet, gentle and caring classmate of Toya's. She's a massive playwright, but has very low self-esteem, so doesn't fully recognise her own talent or belief in herself. Her route was interesting to play as it shows the kinds of awkward situations that can happen when somebody with her kind of personality is thrust into these kinds of situations that require communication and boundary setting. Haruka is Toya's longest friend and fills the childhood friend trope the most of all the cast here. She is sporty and athletic, and also a massive airhead with a bit of a stoic personality. I thought her route was the weakest and had the most missed potential. I'm not really a fan of the character trope she has, and I wish her backstory was explored a bit more. Yayoi is Yuki's manager who helps chauffeur her everywhere, organise her planner, and keep Yuki safe. She cares deeply from Yuki and will work to remove any barriers Yuki faces, and that may include Toya Fuji. She fits the stereotype of the cool, collected, and seemingly emotionless love interest. Her route was an experience. I can't really explain without spoiling, but it is definitely a very unique route. And once the initial weirdness of it wore off, I appreciated what it tried to do and the angle it took to show Yayoi's relationships with Toya, Yuki, and the world around her. Sayoko is the all-new character added to White Album in this remake. She recently graduated from her idol troupe and is trying to pursue a solo career. Her route in many ways is different both in terms of design and content, largely thanks to Akaplus gaining lots of writing experience since writing all of the other routes. That's why I recommend playing her route last. It's the perfect engaging route suitable for the finale after for 30 plus hours it'll take you to read through all of the routes. Now before moving on to my overall thoughts on the story, it's worth touching on the two main side characters, Akira and Eiji. Akira is the protagonist's childhood guy friend who hangs out a lot, having gone to school and college together, and they both work together at the same cafe. I thought he was an interesting character, and he had a surprisingly deep role to play in some of the seemingly less important side routes. On the other hand, Eiji is a veteran in the idol business. He founded Ogata Productions and is Rina's older brother. He can come across as unlikable at times, but this is partly because he's very perceptive regarding Toya's feelings towards his relationship with Yuki, and this does show throughout the game's story. He is definitely an interesting character. To give some spoiler-free thoughts on the story, I did overall enjoy it. It is slow to build up in most routes thanks to the calendar system White Album has, but there is almost always some form of payoff. The circumstances of each route and character are factored in incredibly well. Given this game was groundbreaking back when it originally launched in 1998, I think it's important to cut it a bit of slack when comparing it to more modern releases, especially its own sequel. However, one aspect of the protagonist I didn't really like is the lack of exploration and morality from the perspective, given that he is cheating on his girlfriend in most routes. On the one hand, you see him express his love for Yuki and how he wants to date her and remain loyal to her, but then you also see him say the same thing for other characters he is cheating on in the same route. It's a bit jarring to be honest, and shows a huge lack of self-awareness. Although this is something that is addressed in the sequel story, Toya is still a good character to adopt the perspective for the story. He's hardworking, has a large peer network, and is dependable in pretty much anything. Well, except loyalty to his girlfriend, that is. Now onto the trigger warning list, because here at Milla's Game Room, trigger warnings should be normalised for all visual novels aimed at all genders, not just those aimed at women. With that said, here we go. Depression, anxiety and loneliness, infidelity, non-sexual harassment, sexual assault, both implied and off-screen, sexual themes with non-explicit description and imagery including love bites and sex itself. Bear in mind this was originally an adult game, so what you're getting are originally reworked adult scenes. Violence, including mention of blood, and death/bereavement, where the death in question happened years prior to the main story, so you don't see it at all. Also, this is both a trigger warning and an accessibility issue, but there is a flash photography scene at the end of every route where Yuki is swarmed by the press who are taking photos and hence, well, flash photography. There doesn't seem to be a way to disable the flashes, however you can easily predict when the scene is coming and you can just skip through it accordingly. Aside from a few very minor text variations, the scene is the same on all playthroughs. Still, it's worth noting this issue, and given the age of this game, I doubt this will get an official patch, so plan your playthroughs accordingly if this is going to be a problem for you. Illustrations are done by Hisashi Kawata, a veteran of the original release, and were adapted into the PS3 remake using motion portrait. The portraits themselves are absolutely beautiful, and they're available for every major character as well as some side characters in each route. Motion portraits help bring the characters to life, their portraits expand and contract as if they're actually breathing, their mouths move and their eyes blink. It truly aids immersion, as it was basically Live 2D before Live 2D became a thing. The CGs themselves also look amazing and perfectly capture the drama and intensity, and there are multiple CGs for each route. This all new PC version visually upscaled all the graphics, including the CGs, and they now look better than ever. Compared to the original designs, the new designs are so much better and are more colourful and vibrant. That said, I've got to highlight this here, but I encountered frequent technical issues with these portraits. Often characters' eyes, eyebrows, mouths or noses were duplicated, they had extra Adam's apples below their mouths, or portraits are misaligned, meaning they cut off before reaching the bottom of the screen. This is also why when editing this video I have cropped the screen on some sections so you cannot see the bottom. Some of these glitches are genuinely funny, but they're also quite strange at the same time. From what I understand from doing my research, this is a rare glitch that appears on PCs with certain graphics cards, including mine. There is an unofficial fix that does reduce or eliminate the error for many people, but didn't reduce the problems for me as much as I'd hope. It's a huge shame and only serves to remind me why I wish this game should also come to the Nintendo Switch in English, where issues of specific graphics cards and rigs do not arise. As for the music, it was composed by Michio Kinigusa, rest in peace, as well as Junya Matsuoka. Both are long-time composers for AK+, although for some reason Junya also arranged the OP for Katakoi Contrast? Okay? As for the vocal tracks, they were done by Suara, who is one of AK+'s most frequent collaborators, mostly known in the West for the Uta Waramono series. And by the way, her cover for Powder Snow appears in White Album 1, is by far the best version, and I'm kinda wishing she covered White Album 2's version instead. In fact, speaking of White Album 2, we need to talk about an elephant in the room. Is White Album 1 better than White Album 2? Most people will answer no. However, the fact this question exists does a disservice to White Album 1 because it does have unique positive aspects that make it worth a playthrough. Let's touch on these. The first reason is you get to check out a classic visual novel just by checking out this game. So if you're into older visual novels or haven't learned Japanese yet, this is your chance. As I touched on at the beginning, a lot of classic 1990s era visual novels have been getting localized as of late. So if you're a big fan of visual novels, video games, or influential media in general, that alone makes this title worth playing. Secondly, the writer of White Album 2, Maruto Fumiaki, is a fan of the original White Album. This game served as a direct inspiration for White Album 2 after all, with Fumiaki seeking to surpass the original White Album in every way. If you play White Album Memories Like Falling Snow after playing White Album 2, you will recognise a few aspects of the character arcs, the story, and the route/gameplay structure that Fumiaki reused and expanded on in White Album 2. Just because you may recognise them doesn't mean they will in the same way, and they're still worth experiencing on their own merits. If you're a fan of Maruto Fumiaki's works, there is value in playing a title that inspired his works, even if you don't normally check out visual novels. Finally, from a more practical perspective, Memories Like Falling Snow is a much shorter game compared to White Album 2. So if you want to experience a classic AK+ title without the heavy time commitment most of their titles currently officially available in English, as well as fan translations, demands, this is the best option at the time of this video, at least until more of their older titles get officially localized, that is. And related to that, I do want to address the possibility of a White Album 2 localization. New evidence has come to light since my localization wishlist AK+ video a couple of months ago, and a lot of people have been asking for White Album 2 to come here even more in light of White Album coming to Steam. So let's talk about it a bit. As I touched on, the existence of Memories Like Falling Snow on Steam is the first reason, and from a business perspective it does make sense to localise White Album 1 before White Album 2. Additionally, following on from AK+ wanting to reboot the White Album series, both Maruto Fumiaki and Naoya Shimakawa have posted various cryptic tweets relating to the series. Idols unaffiliated to AK+ have also posted pictures of them holding White Album 2 vinyl, which is very unusual considering AK+ normally do not contact external idols to help them with their projects. And then when you combine this with the fact it's the 10th anniversary for both the introductory chapter anime adaptation, as well as the PS Vita port Shiawaze no Bukogawa, all of this heavily implies AK+ have a major announcement of some sort coming this winter, which has been an annual tradition for White Album 2 for some years now, but usually they are not major. I personally believe this announcement will be a localization of White Album 2 based on the PS Vita port for PC and hopefully consoles too, as well as the long requested anime adaptation of Closing Chapter. This is all purely speculation at this point, but given all these little coincidences are happening one after the other and are so close together, there is no smoke without fire, so to speak. As for White Album Memories Like Falling Snow, its localization for the West is just one of many chapters in the long-running history of the White Album series. But even putting all that aside, White Album 1 tells a solid romance story with a unique cast of characters in its classic 1990s era setting, something that's not seen much nowadays. That said, this game does need an official patch to fix the facial bugs I've outlined already, as well as a multi-language console port to enable more people to experience this story, and so we can have a physical copy of this great game on our shelves. Fingers crossed both come soon, because the fans of visual novels, White Album memories like Falling Snow is an experience absolutely worth checking out. Ever since I got a Steam Deck, I've finally been able to dive back into the world of PC visual novels, as there are so many gems I've wanted to check out for a very long time. One of these titles is Shie no Sona-Nyl, or as it's known in English, Sona-Nyl of the Violet Shadows, which finally got its long-awaited Western release in December 2023, more than 6 years after Manga Gamer first announced the game for the West. It was worth the wait, and in this video, I'm going to tell you all about it. So let's get straight into it. Before diving into Sona-Nyl specifically, I want to give a quick crash course on the developer of Sona-Nyl as well as the series that Sona-Nyl is part of. This game is developed by Liarsoft, who you may know from more recent titles like Azure Nighthawk and Adabana Odd Tales, as well as the upcoming Ever Maiden. Liarsoft games are known for their distinctive art style, as well as dabbling into a variety of subgenres. However, they are also known for the Steampunk franchise, a series of mostly unlocalized, plot-heavy visual novels, also known for having the phrase "what a beautiful" as part of the subtitle. This 6-part series, written by Hikaru Sakurai, who is known for her later work, we'll get into that, was released on PC mainly in the 2000s and early 2010s. Amaterasu Translations, a fan translation group, localized the second and third steampunk titles, Seiken no Ignanok and Shikoku no Shanoff, during the visual fan translation boom back in the day. Hence, if you're a die-hard visual fan, you've probably already read at least one of those titles. Additionally, Manga Gamer officially localized the 5th steampunk title, Gakfen of the Golden Lightning, in early 2016. You can even get it on Steam. Do you need to play any of these other games to understand Sona-Nyl? No, you don't. However, there are references and callbacks to other titles that you will notice as and when, especially Ignanuf and Gakfen. It's kind of like the Science Adventure series in terms of interconnectivity, so while you can, and should, enjoy Sona-Nyl as a standalone experience, it's worth bearing this in mind. Sona-Nyl was originally released in Japan for PC as an adult-only title, and in a rare move from Liarsoft, received official console ports for both the Xbox 360 and the PSP in 2014. What a weird platform choice. Like many visual console ports, this version added all new stories in place of the adult content. Manga Gamer announced Sona-Nyl for PC in 2016, although it would take 6 years for the localization to finally release. Part of the reason is that Sona-Nyl's English version is a technical marvel. It combines both the 18+ PC release and the console release into one massive Ultimate Edition. Given all 3 versions run on different engines with different resolutions, and even includes the text selection minigame, this game was a technical challenge to port. While I played the Steam Refrain version of the game, there is an official 18+ patch available on Manga Gamer if that's your thing. While it's not mine, I appreciate the work the localization team put into making it playable officially. So why am I going over all this information before jumping into the game itself? It's because not only do I believe more people need to know about it, but also this extra effort and subtleties greatly enhance my time with Sona-Nyl. It's also why I believe the official Steam release of Sona-Nyl of the Violet Shadows is the ultimate way to experience the world of Sona-Nyl. Sona-Nyl is a story that reveals its secrets slowly, baffles and amazes in equal measure with its setting and tone, but also devastates the reader the more you come to care about its characters and world the further in you go, and both are very captivating. Sona-Nyl is set in an alternate universe in the early 20th century. In this timeline, New York was mysteriously destroyed 5 years prior to the events of Sona-Nyl. Everyone in the vicinity mysteriously vanished, and New York was locked down and quarantined by the US government. Much like the actual US government behave in the modern day, what happened was covered up and is shrouded in mystery. You switch between 2 protagonists throughout the story. The first, Lily the Stranger, traverses a bizarre alternative version of New York, deep underground. She travels alongside a mysterious man, A, who swears to protect her at any cost, using magical shadow forms to eliminate threats. These threats are both the angels, evil beings that drain the life force of humans to turn them into metal, as well as fully metalized humans that are automatically drawn to Lily. Yeah, kinda like Growlands A Wafer of Time if anyone's played that. The angels in this world are your enemy, not your friend. It's an immediately compelling premise, greatly aided by a large cast of supporting characters Lily meets throughout her journey. In every district of underground New York she passes through, Lily gets to know many locals. They range from the blue-haired fighter Milla to mother and daughter Juliana and Katrin, and also catgirls, most notably the Shat. There are even a couple of people based on real historical figures, which is a whole can of worms in its own right. Lily is altruistic, friendly and kind. She is driven and determined to meet her goal, defined in the game as the horizon. She's also quite naive and vulnerable, and these positive and negative traits add charm to her character. Lily is a great protagonist, and I love her a lot. A is a mysterious man of few words, who wears a train conductor outfit. He can appear quite elusive, especially given his goals are initially unclear. He can appear quite elusive. However, his dedication to protecting Lily is unparalleled, alongside his deep kindness. While their personalities and backgrounds are polar opposites, Lily and A gel so well together. It's worth noting that although there are some action battle segments throughout Lily's story against the Angels, these are few and far between. Instead, these sections serve as a payoff to the time you spend in an area of underground New York. After becoming attached to the various inhabitants of each area, as well as a few recurring characters, most notably Mal the Catgirl and strong warrior Lucky Luciano, Lily and A fight back against each angel, often killing them in one fell swoop using A's powers. They're dramatic and fun to watch, and wonderfully narrated, and you can tell why Sakurai later began working on the Fate franchise. What greatly helps is the presentation. Underground New York oozes a unique art style by Akira, who has worked on other steampunk titles with Lysoft. Sona-Nyl is their most well-known visual work, however, and it's easy to see why. The unique atmosphere is a series of juxtapositions, a world that feels so real, yet so surreal at the same time, a world you know is underground, yet also has a twilight purple sky, acting as if it's on the surface, a city that feels so urbanised, yet is peppered with so many natural features like mushrooms, you question whether you're even in a city. It reminds me of both solarpunk and cyberpunk alike, which are both two heavily contrasting aesthetics. It's both unique and memorable, and I love it so much. Another juxtaposition worth discussing is the other protagonist, Alicia Wentworth. She undergoes a similar journey, albeit on the surface of the ruined New York City, alongside her robotic companion, John. She managed to sneak into ruined New York and try to find a way to the epicenter of the ruined metropolis, which resembles what you'd find in modern day post-apocalyptic films and war zones in other parts of the real world. Alicia's sections of the story are brief compared to Lily's, as much of her character development takes place in the interlude sections in between each chapter. Alicia's interlude portions are prequels to the main story and introduce a few noteworthy characters of her own, most notably her best friend Vivi. In the prelude portions, Alicia is quite an outgoing, chatty airhead who's studying hard at a university in nearby Massachusetts. These prelude portions are mainly slice of life and are seemingly disconnected from the events during the main story. However, they all serve to add important context, plus are also a nice change of pace on their own merits. Over time, Lily and Alicia's separate journeys begin to come together as the mysteries of this world's New York slowly reveal themselves. The early chapters of Sona-Nyl serve as world building to introduce the world and their journeys, whereas the latter half serves as the payoff. There is a core theme for both Lily and Alicia's journeys right the way throughout the game, from the very beginning. Emotions. I'm going to keep this as spoiler-free as possible, because not only are both journeys beautifully told, but I do believe this is something you have to experience yourself. I don't think I'll be able to do it justice in this video, even if I were to spoil everything that happens throughout their journeys, and trust me, a lot happens. Starting with Lily, at the start of Sona-Nyl she is fairly emotionless because of her circumstances. She's fallen into this mysterious city with no idea what's going on. She's having to learn about the world around her and her mission in detail. As a result of all her experiences with the people she meets, she starts to develop emotions, and thus can express herself more vividly. She becomes an active participant in her own story, and her passions soon extend far beyond the mere desire to journey to the horizon. If I were to make a comparison to JRPG characters, I'd compare Lily to Altina Orion from Betrayal series. She undergoes a similar character arc throughout the Cold Steel saga. If you've played that, you've got some idea over what Lily's arc is like, although there are some key differences too. Now on to Alicia. As Alicia explores the ruins of New York, she's also emotionless, but for very different reasons. She's so pragmatically minded and comes across as quite cold and passive, and this is a stark contrast to what you see of her in the interlude flashbacks. That's just one of many mysteries Sona-Nyl poses to the reader that you have to find out for yourself. What I will touch on though is that she does begin to feel emotions, but in a very different way to Lily. Instead of learning emotions for the first time, she's feeling emotions she's been trying to suppress all this time. This is compounded by the constant isolation and desolation Alicia battles daily. After all, she only has a robot for company. It's emotionally devastating the more you discover why Alicia is in the position she's in, the burden she carries, and how coming to New York changes her. If I was to make another JRPG comparison, Alicia is kinda like Kohaku Hearts from Tales of Hearts. That's a pretty underrated Tales of game, by the way, go play it. Both character arcs are beautifully told. Lily and Alicia are the main stars of the show in Sona-Nyl's world, and their journeys throughout both versions of New York are both captivating and thought-provoking in equal measure. It's easy to sympathise with both heroines because you want to see them reach their destination. Additionally, the wider mysteries surrounding the world are intriguing in their own right. You will want to read through this story to the end. And speaking of which, what kind of visual novel is Sona-Nyl to begin with? Sona-Nyl is not a visual novel that you can easily categorise by subgenre. I kind of alluded to this earlier given I mentioned that Liasoft have dabbled in multiple genres, and these kind of genre hybrids are part of the reason why. Sona-Nyl is a blend of multiple different subgenres. Eroge is the easiest subgenre to define given the original game, well, wasn't eroge. However, Liasoft considers the adult PC version and the console version to be two different interpretations of the same title. Sona-Nyl also falls into both plot gay and Naki gay territory, given this game has some fantastic world and character building that will both make you cry and satisfy your brain with lore and world building as well as character building. Chanigi also fits in with Sona-Nyl due to the battle segments within Lily's story. It's a really unique blend, as I'm sure you can gather. The most underappreciated categorization, surprisingly enough, is otome. While Sona-Nyl is not an otome game, the vast majority of romantic pairings in this game are explored from the perspective of women. The most notable examples are Lily and Alicia, given they have romantic feelings for other men. However, other characters Lily meets and connects with throughout her journey are mostly women. So when Lily listens to their stories, she hears the perspectives of women, including romance. There are also some subtle LGBTQ+ themes near the beginning of Sona-Nyl too, given that Lily attempts to pass as a boy while trying to establish her identity early on in the underground. While this cross-dressing, gender-presenting element doesn't carry on throughout the story and world like in, say, Jack Jian, it's worth mentioning. Sona-Nyl isn't a queer game by any means outside of this subplot, however it does borrow from queer media in terms of its unconventional romance, as well as using gender presentation to explore and forge identity. This is something many gender questioning people do while they work out who they are on a fundamental level. Given that Lily was at the onset of her personal and emotional journey at the time, this plot device makes perfect sense, especially when you consider how supportive the characters around her are at this point in the game, especially Milla. While I'm on themes, now is a good time to discuss the trigger warnings, so here is the list. Violence, drugs and alcohol, prostitution, multiple character deaths, petrification, reanimation of the dead, and these are a few more spoilery ones, so one character death that includes a bloody, disturbing CG, consensual sex with an angel, yeah that was a wild scene, romance between a student and a teacher. Are there any flaws with Sona-Nyl? In my view, there aren't any outright flaws, but there are a few things I want to bring up. Firstly, although it didn't bother me, I'd say the formulaic structure can be seen as a drawback, because it broadly remains the same until the final chapter. Additionally, the newspaper minigame at the end of each chapter requires you to select one of 3 paragraphs across old archival issues of the Washington Post. By selecting these paragraphs, you rewrite them to better reflect what happened in New York, rather than what the US government claims happened. If you get one of them wrong, you're locked out of the true ending. You will know if you get it wrong when a purple moon appears across the screen. I suggest using a walkthrough. There's one on the Steam forum for this game, in order to progress through the minigame with no issues. Although you can also save and reload if you do miss anything. These newspaper clippings also provide valuable context for the wider story regarding New York's fate, so I recommend reading all of them. Finally, there is no console version of the game available in English, which means if you struggle to play PC games, you might find playing Sona-Nyl difficult. However, Sona-Nyl does run perfectly on the Steam Deck. It is officially verified after all, which more than makes up for it. I'd love to see Man Gamer return to the game at some point and add in achievements, trading cards and other Steam features. If it ever did come to consoles in English, I would pick it up too, and I hope it does happen. So what is the legacy of Sona-Nyl? In terms of Lysoft themselves, they have moved on from the steampunk series. There are two reasons for this. The first is that the steampunk series has never sold particularly well, whether in Japan or overseas. This may explain why Manga Gamer took 7 years to localise a title into English, and why they don't intend to localise any more steampunk titles. Writer Hikaru Sakurai left Lysoft, and as mentioned throughout the video, she now works on the Fate franchise. Although a 7th steampunk title was announced many years ago, with Sakurai as both the writer and director, this new title will likely never see the light of day, so it's safe to assume that the steampunk series is now finished. However, that's not strictly a bad thing. Visual novels are a niche medium, and much like more well-known classics like Two Heart, Sakura Wars, and Ever 17, standalone stories within a franchise can, and are, appreciated for what they are, long after their original release. They too, much like the journeys of Lily and Alicia, are emotionally moving in their own unique ways. While Sona-Nyl is nowhere near as popular, fans of the game do look back on it, as well as the wider steampunk franchise, fondly. It's a product of its time, but Manga Gamer's fantastic PC port greatly helps Sona-Nyl feel like a brand new title in the 2020s. If you're a fan of visual novels, especially plot gay, otome, or Fate more generally, I highly recommend Sona-Nyl. It's easily one of the best VNs I've read in some time, and is among my favourite PC exclusive visual novels that I've read to date. While I doubt Sona-Nyl will get the attention it deserves from the mainstream visual novel community, it absolutely deserves your time. The Noin 9 franchise has a long history. It's one of Otomate's most popular otome game franchises, having originally began life as a PSP release quite late into its life cycle. Noin 9, Noin and Nonet, as it was known at the time, was a successful release, and would later go on to be ported to multiple platforms, including the PS Vita and Nintendo Switch, with the name Var Commons. 2 fan discs were later released for the game in Japan, Last Era and Actune, as well as lots of merchandise. It was one of the first works of the writer Ushio Ayan, having already written Juzengi and later on the Even If Tempest games. In terms of the Western world, we first got Noin 9 Var Commons localised on the PS Vita back in 2015, as well as the anime adaptation. It was one of the first non-Hakuoki otome game localizations we got from Axis Games and Idea Factory, and it came around the same time as Amnesia and Code Realize. It was largely forgotten about, given that Code Realize took most of the spotlight, both on the Vita and on the Switch. We got the fan discs for Code Realize for those consoles first, but now it's Noin 9's time to shine. It was also one of the otome games I played on the PS Vita, and although I didn't play it until years after it originally came out, when I did, it became one of my favourite otome games to date. I found its world to be really captivating and intriguing, accompanied by beautiful art and music. Until recently, it was one of the few games I'd recommend getting a PS Vita for. It was even number 3 in my top 10 Vita games video I did last year. Go watch that please. This was because even though the game was ported to Switch in Japan in a bundle pack alongside Last Era back in 2019, known as Noin 9 Loffen, it wasn't localised for the West. Of course that's since changed, as Axis announced they'd be bringing Noin 9 back to the West, dating Var Commons with an improved localisation and bringing Last Era West for the first time as separate releases. So I've decided to take this opportunity to replay the game and do a retrospective on it, as well as check out Last Era for the first time. It is one of the most anticipated 2023 releases after all. Is this game just as good as I remember, and if so, what about it makes it so special? How this is going to work is that this video is going to be a retrospective of Var Commons with some very light spoilers, mostly relating to trigger warnings. Any heavy spoiler discussion I will save for the Last Era video when that game comes out later this year. Yep, I'm already committing to creating a Last Era video. This is also partially because Noin 9 Var Commons is known for having plot holes that are addressed in the fan disc, so certain aspects of this world's story won't be explored or discussed here, likewise detailed discussion of certain events in the story. Also, I won't be discussing the second fan disc, Actune. First off, it's not on Switch, and it's not localised, because apparently it is a load of wank, so we can pretend it doesn't exist. Also, I don't personally consider these spoilers, but others will, but in the background during the gameplay there will be some CGs at times, Not many, but if that bothers you, consider listening to the audio only. You will still get the full experience. With all this said, let's get started. So even though this is a visual video, I'm not going to start this section with a game synopsis, and the reason why will become clear enough. I'm going to touch on a setting first, and the way I can describe it is a combination of science fiction and historical fiction with elements of fantasy incorporated within. The core of the setting you experience throughout the game is on a ship called the Norn. It looks like something that could come out of a fantasy RPG, but is very much rooted in the real world. Like, there are streets, functional kitchens, a beautiful freshwater waterfall with its own rainbow, as well as its own forest. You also get to see cute birds of all kinds called Hyokos on board, which are basically this world's equivalent of the chocobos from the Final Fantasy series. It's not something you'd not conventionally associate as being on a ship, which greatly helps build its unique atmosphere. When you're not on the ship, you are on the ground in typical grassland desert settings, or you're in towns resemble the early 20th century, complete with electricity pylons that resemble the average Western European streets. In some ways it feels like a trip back in time. That said, this is a world that has its own problems. It's a world where conflicts and skirmishes are happening, so you must be on your guard whenever you're not on the ship. It's also a world that is literally ruled by the World, an organisation shrouded in mystery, and those who gave you your mission. You, aka the main cast, which I'll come on to, are on a journey to discover a destination that you do not know the identity of, and is absolutely vital that you must complete your mission. All of this comes together to create an intriguing setting that has a lot of promise and is immediately engaging to anyone who reads about it. It's not surprising it's been so successful. But back to the Norn now and its character cast. On the ship is the cast of characters: 3 girls, 8 guys, 1 boy, and a lot of birds. And you can play as 4 of them. I'm getting ahead of myself a bit, so I'm going to go back into the structures and characters a bit more. The structure is a key aspect of this game that I need to touch on now before I elaborate on the characters any further, and this is because it's important to understand the complexity of the story. When you start the game, you play as Sarata. Now, Sarata is very different from the typical character you play as in Otome games, as he is a 12-year-old child prodigy. After going to the Tokyo Diet Building on a school trip, he hears a mysterious song, and in the process, gets sucked into the world of Norn 9. As at this point he meets the core cast of Norn 9, joins the Norn and begins to get involved with this cast of characters. What also makes Sarata a unique perspective is that his interactions with the cast are purely platonic, but his perspective is critical to the story. I also think it means a lot of people overlook him. He's a very logically minded character who refuses to believe what he sees at first, but there's a charm about it that makes him a memorable character. It's quite typical not just of kids to tell it like it is, but also child prodigies in general, especially when those characterizations are combined. I'm not surprised Otomata did a good job at characterizing him as they've done this before. For example, one of their most popular games is Clock Zero, where that game features a core cast of 12-year-old characters who go to school together, and at night they end up part of the same dream world where they're aged 10 years older. So they have experience in this. And yeah, I wanted an excuse to talk about Clock Zero again, so sorry for the deviation! Or more like, thank you for the deviation. I should also add that Sarata is, because he's a boy, there's obviously the gender dynamic change there, so we don't play as guys in Otome games normally, aside from the occasional perspective shift, whereas here, no, Sarata is a core character. So speaking of changing characters, early on in the prologue you get to a choice, where following the choice you select, the game shifts into 3 perspectives, or as they're called, paths. Each path corresponds to one of the 3 women on the Norn. They are Koharu, Mikoto and Nanami, who each have 3 guys each they can romance, and once you've completed the happy ends of all 9 guys, you can then return to the prologue and select a 4th choice, and this leads to the epilogue ending of Var Commons, and in many ways, it's kind of poetic that you start your journey as Sarata, and then you end your journey as Sarata. So now I'm going to talk about each female character a bit, as well as the guys they can romance. I'll go by each girl on the order you can see them on the select screen, and then talk about each guy factoring the recommended route order. Yes, there is a recommended route order, and deviating from this path does lead for spoilers. I will spoil a few light details, but relate mostly to trigger warnings, though I will have a full trigger warning list near the end. It's also worth mentioning the early event in the story that leads to people getting put into pairs, and an opportunity for love to blossom. An early event occurs where the ship is attacked by a man in a floating capsule wielding a gun, and a gun is something that most people on board the Norn are entirely unfamiliar with. And during the process, it's quickly established that one person on board the Norn is a traitor, which adds a sense of tension and mystery to an otherwise, well, it's quite an idyllic and tranquil lifestyle. Hence, you are put into pairs with other people to decrease the opportunities for the traitor to act, so you can monitor each other better. And this is when you pick your partner, and that dictates what route you are put onto. First off, I love Koharu as a character. She has this combination of being really sweet and wholesome, but also sheltered and isolated, having been away from most people for most of her life. She's one of the last people to join the Norn, with her finding Sarata and taking him on board during the prologue. Because she's one of the last to board the ship, it's interesting to see how she integrates into the cast, given many of the others have already made friends and know each other a bit. Her power is an offensive, pyrokinetic based fire power, and it's something she deeply dislikes and is scared to show to others. It's generally recommended to play as her first because two of her routes, namely Kakeru and Senri, are part of the recommended route order. Kakeru's route is one of, if not the first route you should play early on, as his route also serves a lot to understand the wider world of Norn 9, as well as the dynamics on the ship. It is vital from a plot perspective, basically. Kakeru as a person though, he's kind of questionable. He's very much one of the leaders of the group aboard the Norn, and it does show. However, he can come across as a bit of a bully and a bit obnoxious at times. The game suggests he deliberately acts this way to describe his care for others, and I'm gonna be honest, I really struggled to click with it. Especially because he's very nice to Koharu in her routes, but not so nice in general outside of that. Senri is the embodiment of the hikikomori trope, which is something you don't really see much of in VNs that aren't heavily rooted into otaku culture in Japan. So yeah, this VN is not a science adventure game, this is very much different. His route is wholesome as you see him slowly begin to come out of his shell, participate with the group more, and especially with Koharu trying to accommodate him as best as she can. Although one thing I don't like is that his voice acting is often very quiet, meaning it's difficult to hear him in conversations compared to other voiceovers unless you turn the music off. The third character, Masamune, is locked and is recommended as one of the last routes you play. He is one of the oldest characters in the game, and it shows in his confidence and his leadership. By extension, his power is also being able to contact the world directly, which is unique among the cast. I think you should do his route later in the game, as there are certain aspects of his route story, especially in relation to other characters, that are better played after playing others first. As for Masamune himself, it is interesting to see how he interacts with Koharu and how much he cares about her. The dynamic is very much an older boyfriend alongside a younger girlfriend. Mikoto is the leadership figure out of the three girls. She very much fits the tsundere trope, but does have a very nice and caring side, especially with the other girls. That said, she takes protecting the rows around her very seriously, to a point where she's one of the ship's leaders as well. She also has the power to put magical barriers around something, which is vital for defending the Norn. She takes it so seriously even when it's detrimental to her. The workaholic trope is very strong. I liked her a lot as a character. Some of her dialogue can be a bit stuck up and bossy, mainly because of her background as being born to a rich family, but also so blunt it can be hilarious at times, especially when she's rejecting romantic advances from others, especially Itsuki. Sakuya is part of the recommended route order. Of her guys, you should play as him first. As for childhood friend love interest, of course this plays a critical role in his arc. Throughout their time on Norn, Mikoto and Sakuya are practically inseparable, especially in his route. He is very perceptive and kind of charming. He's also good at de-escalating potentially tricky situations between other characters. I liked him a lot, and personally I think he's one of the best routes in the game, but to explain why would lean into major spoiler territory, so I definitely recommend playing this for yourself. Itsuki is very much the flirtatious love interest who acts like an airhead at times. It can be a bit hard to deal with at first, like overly flirtatious guys in general who behave similar to the way Itsuki does is kind of like, yeah, I don't want to be around you, and it makes me uncomfortable. And the more you play his route though, the more you begin to understand how that's one part of his personality, and he's a lot more observant than he lets on, and of course quite caring. And this is something that you see down the route as Mikoto and the player begins to see this part of Itsuki, and then Mikoto becomes attracted to him. It's a great story of how opposites attract, and that was so sweet. And finally, we have Natsuhiko, who is recommended to be the last route that you play in the game. He's basically the closest that you've got to an antagonist out of the 9 guys. He's basically against the world and by extension the Espers. I found his route really interesting because it's basically enemies to lovers done right, in that him and Mikoto become lovers, and there's also a lot of plot holes that are filled in when you play through his route, so that's another reason why you've got to play it last. In many ways it's quite different to the other routes, so I definitely recommend not playing his route first, or even anything other than last. Nanami is the 3rd member of the girls and is the last trio of guys as well. She's generally quite a quiet person, quite timid and awkward, but is a good person. She has the kuderi trope, which I'm personally not super fond of. She has the power to wipe people's memories, and much like Haru, she doesn't like or want to use this power. Her power has the most potential to really develop the story as a plot device, and I'm really pleased to say in that respect they each delivered. I love how in each Naruto's and others, her memory wiping power is used to further develop the characters in unique ways, whether it's just the fact it's there or it's actually used. I really like that aspect of it. And on to the guys now. Haishi is part of the recommended route order, and out of all of the Nami's interests is definitely the one I recommend playing first. He has the power of telepathy and is extremely sensitive to knowing how others feel as a result, and he's generally more of the happy, positive vibe setter as a result. His route is also worth playing among the first, as there are no major plot spoilers for the overarching world. So if you wish to avoid spoilers for the overall world, this is definitely one to play first out of all of the recommended routes. Plus their relationship from friends to lovers is also extremely key as well. Akito is not part of the recommended route order, but his route's one to play later in the game. His route does have a lot of spoilers, so there's that to consider. As for Akito himself, he's a respected chef on board the Norn, and while he appears quite cold and bitter, especially towards Nanami, he's also quite nice. He does have elements of the Tundra trope, and I will say, without spoiling anything about the story, the more you understand Akito and the story he has, the more you warm up to him, and I loved his route by the end of it. He's essentially a guy with a very tough persona, but has a bit of a massive softie inside, which I thought was so cool. Ron is the last route you should play out of Nanami's batch. I'd argue play him before Natsuhiko. He's very much the trash love interest. He's absent-minded, doesn't seem to care about other people, and can be quite obnoxious and hard to interact with. He's not a good character, and him and Nanami have the biggest age gap of all the couples on board, which is also kinda yikes as well. One warning I will give about his route, which does lean into spoiler territory a bit. His route does have both a bad ending and a tragic love ending, and both of these can be quite distressing. And I would recommend caution if you plan to do Ron's route and only stick to the happy ending, or at least look up the trigger warnings first. His route does hold some value in it though, due to the surprising level of self-awareness he has about not just himself, but also his role in the world and story, and also because some of his dialogue with Nanami can be kind of funny because of just how bizarre and out of place it is. It's just kind of weird. So yes, even garbage human beings can be entertaining. And also he has very sexy pecs, just saying. As for the epilogue route I touched on earlier, this route basically finishes Sarata's story. It's much shorter than any of your routes, but it's also the simplest to complete as there are no choices after the one you select in the prologue. It's such a cute ending that is worth experiencing yourself, and that really helps flesh out Sarata's character. It goes to show how Sarata is just as important a protagonist as the 3 heroines, and it really does show here. And I love how Sarata was incorporated into the story in this way. The best way to remember this game's structure here is that it operates in threes. You have 3 heroines, each with 3 guys to romance, and 3 overarching stories. These overarching stories share a few common events, some of which can be skipped on repeat playthroughs. However, others are largely overarching events where the dialogue varies a bit more than just a few minor tweaks. There's also a broad conclusion of each story based on one of 3 scenarios. Keeping it as vague as possible, these 3 broad endings depend on whether you reach your destination because of events that take place during the story, and if you do, whether you meet certain requirements required to carry out your mission. Each ending also differs slightly per character, especially for those where you don't reach the destination. It's difficult to elaborate any more without spoiling anything, but if you've played 1 or 2 routes, you'll know what I'm getting at. So why I'm mentioning all these things? This is in part because one of the biggest strengths of Norn 9 is how the story is very multi-layered, and how various things seemingly minor or irrelevant in one route ended up being fleshed out in another. It feels like you're in a very complex web of relationships between this closely knit cast that you will only fully understand once you've completed all the routes. This applies in both the more slice of life portion of the story, usually the first few chapters of each character arc, to the last couple of chapters where plot development of the overall world occurs during the conclusions to each of these characters' individual stories. Other aspects include how the shared scenes, both skippable and non-skippable, vary ever so slightly depending on the heroine you're playing as. It makes repeat playthroughs of these scenes interesting to read as each heroine's personality shows clearly throughout as the perspective shifts. Plus also the interactions between the girls in these scenes, especially when they talk about the guys they like, is really cute and heartwarming. This is not something commonly seen in otome games because they usually only contain one heroine and maybe another side character, and it's really nice that it has this extra of depth. As I mentioned in the beginning, Nor9 Var Commons is known for having some plot holes in its story. I love the science fiction setting and it's so many original ideas that aren't fully explained, and personally I'm willing to overlook it for two reasons. Firstly, I want to see how Nor9 Last Era addresses the many plot holes, and secondly, I love the romance and the overall characters a lot, so these wider details can drift into the background a bit. In fact, at times I often didn't care about the wider settings because the immediate relationships between the cast members were so good and engrossing. I will admit though that replaying the game for me did make these few plot points missing more noticeable and annoying however, and I guess it goes to show how much flew over my head back then. Additionally, because there are 9 guys to romance, the routes are naturally a bit shorter. Personally, I prefer shorter routes compared to longer ones, so this is a positive in my book. Of course, many dislike shorter routes as character development can be rushed a bit, but because of how interlinked the routes are, this issue is reduced to a large extent. It's something that could only be done in a game as deeply interlinked as this. Overall, I love the stories, both for the individual characters and the wider world. And one final thing for stories before I move on to the trigger warnings are the Hyokos. They are, as I mentioned earlier, the equivalent of Final Fantasy's chocobos, and it is also cute seeing them interact with the cast and themselves, and they really help to lighten the mood of the game, especially on the Norn. It's also cute how their way of speaking are just bird sounds as well as one-line words of text like happy, confirmation, and angry. This is before mentioning the Hyoko TV segments where they're kind of like optional segments you can get during the story, where you can view the characters interacting with each other and this Hyoko interviewing them, which is really cool. They're nice short little skits that break up the action a bit. And now onto trigger warnings. Most of these are limited to the bad and tragic love endings at the end of each route. Not all routes feature some of these, but some of them can, so let's get into them. I'm going to be brief to also minimise spoilers as well. General violence, death of major characters, which is mostly in the tragic love endings, however this also happens in Masamune's route regardless of the ending. Gun use, which is limited mostly to Natsuhiko as well as a traitor. Abuse, primarily verbal, but this is most pronounced in Ron's bad ending. Brainwashing and manipulation, mainly involving one particular character. Attempted / potential sexual assault, but nothing happens though, and a lot of the death also occurs off screen as well. Anyway, now onto the art and music. This is easily one of the highlights of the game and really helps create a captivating setting. The character art is done by Taita, who is known in the world of otome games for illustrating Nightshade, the upcoming Charade Maniacs, and the recently released Tsukai Tenki from Otomate's sister brand Alta Gear in Japan. I love her art so much, and Nor9 is a great showcase of it. As for the music, Nobuo Uematsu composed the main theme of the game, Arc of Destiny World in the Norn. Yep, that legendary Nobuo Uematsu, known in the world of video games for the likes of Final Fantasy and various Mistwalker titles, including the most recently released Fantasian. It's a great opening theme that really helps immerse people into the world of Nor9, plus also, it makes pretty good brand recognition. And speaking of brand recognition, a lot of thing that people don't know is that literally every other track and an arrangement of the main game theme was composed by an Australian guy named Kevin Penkin. Yep, before he got his big break on Made in Abyss and various other big name video games and anime, he worked on niche Japanese games. And this isn't even his first otome game. He had previously worked on the currently unlocalized Juzengui, also with Nobuo Uematsu, and also Ushio Ayane, which is really weird. But back to Nor 9, I love Painkin's soundtrack. It's a great mix of science fiction and orchestrated music, and complements the unique atmosphere extremely well and is easy to highlight of the game from an audio perspective. Some of my favourite themes include Kobereru, Hisashi and Hope to the Future, but all of them are great. It's no wonder he went on to compose so many iconic anime and games since. In many ways, he is the unsung hero of the game's soundtrack, and it's great that he was able to use this as a springboard for future success. Additionally, Yanagi Nagi sung the opening and ending vocals for the game, as well as the song first heard by Sarata, all of which are also great. The background art is done by Akiba Minoru, who is known as the art director for Rent-A-Girlfriend, Magical Girls Site and the Pokemon movies. In the world of Otome games, he also worked on the more recent Even If Tempest from Voltage. The backgrounds are lovely. They have lots of colours and fit the atmosphere perfectly, especially on the Norn. Now on to localization and miscellaneous features of the game. Now first off, as many people know, the original Nor 9 localization from the days of the Vita wasn't the best. It was well known for having lots of translation errors, typos and other indications that it was a localization done on the cheap as part of Axis Games' long-running issues with Otome Game QA, you know, the typical budget visual novel localization. Well, the localization was given a touch-up. Otome Game veteran Ann Lee was hired to proofread this game and the upcoming Last Era to correct terminology and improve the localization overall, to make it more consistent with the Japanese original. No more awkward kissing sounds, unfitting comparisons to Snow, and much less typos as well. Overall clumsy wording. While the original localization on the Vita was readable, as well I enjoyed it, so I can verify that for myself, this version is so much better and far succeeds the original. At this point I would recommend not even bothering with the Vita version unless it's literally the only thing you've got. The UI has also received a glow up for this Switch port. There are now options to skip directly to the next choice or chapter, which greatly helps with accessibility. If you hold ZL, you can open a new menu to quickly trigger certain settings, including the skip to next chapter option. I wholeheartedly recommend taking advantage of this. Weirdly, however, there are voice settings in the options for characters that appear in Last Era available in the settings, and this is likely a result of Var Commons and Last Era being split apart from the Nor 9 Loffen pack into two separate releases, and I think this is more an issue on Otomate's part rather than Axie's. So if you're wary of Last Era spoilers in any form, you don't need to disable the voices, avoid the menu, so just leave the voices as they are. A couple of other things I want to touch on are the bonus features. Most of them are locked behind the Nor 9 store. As you play through more of the game and beat the happy endings, as well as find and watch all the Hayoko channel scenes, you can use the points to unlock various things, like mini episodes with each love interest, the audio player, and a mini comic strip. You will need to play mini episodes to unlock the final CG for each love interest, so it pays to look into this. If you don't have enough points, you can play Nor 9 Quest, an 8-bit style game where you see the characters in pixel art form doing things. I'll be honest, I found this mode to be kind of boring and was probably the weakest part of the overall package, and I wouldn't bother with this at all honestly, as there's no gameplay at all. The sprites do look very nice though, and it's really cool seeing places on the Norn rendered in pixel sprites reminiscent of 8 and 16-bit games. There's also Nor 9 Ensemble, which is a mode where you can use the various keywords that you unlock throughout the game to make a conversation between all of the guys. This is another feature that I don't really care for myself, because there's not really much to it once you've unlocked everything, but it's nice to have, especially if you're into seiyus and you understand conversational Japanese, because there are no subs here. Finally, there are two more things I forgot to mention. The first is that the chibi art that you see for the ensemble and the CG gallery section are done by Satoi, who is very well known in the Otome game industry for the likes of Diabolic Lovers, Rebirthday Song, Oz Mafia. Second thing, as with the CG gallery, there was a feature added to the Vita version where you could press the prompts on screen so you can see them say various text, which to Axie's credit has been localized, and it's really nice and actually helps improve the experience. Looking back on Nor 9, I really enjoyed revisiting it. It's a classic Otome game for a reason, and it's one I do recommend if you're looking for a plot-heavy visual with lots of romance scattered throughout. I'm so glad Axies decided to bring it back to the West, because now a new generation of Otome fans can experience it on the Switch alongside many other classics, new and old. I'm looking forward to playing Last Era for the first time later this year, as I think it has a lot of potential to further expand on this amazing world, as well as answer the many plot holes Var Commons has. I think the other best way to describe Nor9 is that it's not about the journey you take, it's about the friends you make along the way and the connections you make. It's about understanding the world around you and how it all comes together, and it's about immersing yourself with all these interesting and memorable characters and living life with these people. And of course, falling in love with handsome guys. A unique route structure helps greatly to differentiate this from other Otome games, and visual novels in general, and because of this, even if you're not into Otome games, I think you will appreciate the world it offers and what it tried to achieve, and the unique visual novel experience that it overall comes together to form. I overall definitely recommend getting this. Pick it up on sale if you're on the fence. Hopefully you enjoy this great game as much as I did. I've finally got around to this. Yep, several months later than I initially promised, I'm now finally able to talk about my thoughts on one of my most anticipated 2023 localizations, the fandisc for Nor9 Last Era. Let's get straight into it. Originally released for the PlayStation Vita in 2015, Nor9 Last Era serves as a companion title to the PSP/Vita title Nor9 Var Commons, previously released in English in 2015. I say companion title because it's both a sequel, prequel and retelling of Var Commons all in one. Yep, while it's a bit of a complex sounding game, it's not at all complex once you've actually played it. You do need to play Nor9 Var Commons first though before jumping into this one. This title is after all a fandisc. Additionally, this video serves as an appendix to my previous review from a year ago, so it's not going to be as long as that video, and I do recommend watching that first before this one, although you don't need to. You see, Last Era in many ways completes the story of Nor9. While Var Commons is a great game, a lot of background knowledge and events are not fully explained, especially relating to the world building. Rather, these events are played second to the character interactions and core romance, which is totally fine. However, it was one of the most notable flaws with Nor9 Var Commons that even fans of the game like myself can't ignore. Hence, this is why many English-speaking Otome fans wanted Last Era to receive a localization back during the PlayStation Vita's lifecycle. However, this never happened. Much like Var Commons, Last Era also adopts a unique structure. The game is split into 4 main sections: Prelude, Concerto, Fugue, and Fantasia. The Nor9 shop returns from the original game, as well as a new Nor9 Plus Life minigame, which I'll also come onto later. So let's break down each new section a bit more, shall we? The first section of the game is Prelude. You have to play this portion of the game first before all the others unlock. This portion tells the origin stories of how each of the 9 guys, and by extension Mikoto and Nanami, joined the Norn. It's a really interesting take on the story, especially because it's told in an enforced playing order, reflecting who joined the ship and when. Nothing like this exists in Var Commons, or even Last Era for that matter. Nor9 normally emphasises freedom in what order you can play through each route, for the most part, so being forced to meet the guys again in this order is quite refreshing. Additionally, the enforced playing order also serves to familiarise yourself with the characters again, even if you've not played the base game for a while. Next up is Concerto. This is the bulk of Last Era's content, as it contains the after stories for all 9 guys you can romance. Each after story is split into 4 portions: a prologue, Moonlight, aka the part of the story that focuses on deepening relationships, Sunburst, which focuses on new challenges, usually expanding on plot points highlighted in Var Commons, and the Moonlight portion of the route, and finally the epilogue. You have to select the correct choices throughout both Moonlight and Sunburst to unlock the epilogue. You can easily follow a walkthrough for this online, however, if you make a mistake, you can replay the story from the start of a chapter in the main menu. You don't have to restart the entire story from the beginning. This part of the game is easy to highlight for me. I love seeing what happened to these characters following the events of the main game, and it's also due to its structure. All 9 after stories also follow the same 3 core endings split over the 9 routes like in Var Commons. So not only do you see what happens between each character and their relationships, but you also see what happens to the world around them as a result of the Esper's decision at the end of Var Commons. I love this development angle as it provides some good brain food for the lore, all while also seeing the relationships deepen. It's easily the most satisfying part of the game. As a result, some new characters are also introduced in many of the routes that did not appear in Var Commons at all, or if they did appear in Var Commons, only had a name or no sprite, these kind of things. Additionally, these new characters also have their time to shine and are well developed in their own right. Thinking about it more, I'm not really surprised that my favourite after stories were Sakuya, Itsuki, Masamune and Natsuhiko's, given how they further expanded the world as well as their love. However, even some of the more purely character focused routes like Senri, Heishi and Akito routes were favourites of mine. Even Ron, my least favourite guy from the original game, became a much more interesting character in his after story. There were no bad after stories, and due to there only being one end, it is possible to guess your way through to the end without a guide. Next up, we get to Fugue. This part of the game retells the events of Var Commons from the perspective of the guys, including some exclusive conversations. This part of the game is a little bit more mixed to me. First of all, I do think it's cool seeing what is essentially a Bishoujo version of Norn 9 within Last Era. We even get to see the same CGs from Norn 9 reused within this abridged story mode alongside some exclusive conversations between the guys. As for why I'm not super into it, it's very much subjective. Because I already knew what was going to happen, I didn't really want to replay the same content again, especially slice of life content that lacks brain food. I need to stay invested. This is why I rarely replay games in general, yet alone visual novels, unless there is truly something special to me. Additionally, although it's marked as an abridged version of Var Commons' routes, these routes didn't really feel that short, so I didn't read much of this part of the game. I just wasn't able to stay hooked, and it's not the game's fault at all. That said, if you do pick up Last Era, I definitely recommend reading through this content if it sounds more like your kind of thing. I love its inclusion even though it's not for me. And I do think it's okay to skip reading parts of visual novels, including routes, if it's not your kind of thing as well. This is fine, regardless of visual novel genre. The final portion is Fantasia. This part of the game tells 3 short stories where all the espers and other characters are transformed into cute shibis and have to complete a challenge to transform back into their normal sizes. This is set during Var Commons and is a nice way to spend a couple of hours. The stories are funny fluff that doesn't outstay its welcome and is a nice little extra. Finally, there is the Norn 9 Plus Life. This is a sprite-based minigame where the Norn is combined with Super Mario World and Pokemon to make a cool RPG where Koharu, Mikoto and Nanami walk around and interact with characters. This is to gain points in order to use on the Norn 9 store. I love this minigame, although it does get quite repetitive. If anything, I wish it was a full-on RPG minigame with its own mechanics, as is the case in other titles like Dungeon Travelers, Little Buster's baseball minigame, and well, the entirety of the Harukanero Toki no Naka Des series. Go watch my review party video by the way, links in the description. The Norn 9 store reprises its role from the original title, where you can unlock new bonus stories and content, like the music and art gallery. It's a nice addition and leads to me discussing the presentation. The core staff behind Norn 9 Var Commons returned to reprise their roles. Ushio Ayan wrote the scenario with assistance from Nino Mei Nikai, Satoi worked on the chibi portraits for Fantasia, while Tater worked on all new portraits for the party. I love all the new outfits as well as other new drawings, such as the back of the characters. It would have been nice to have seen this in the original Var Commons, but it goes to show how popular Norn 9 became, hence why this fandisc exists at all. Veteran composer Kevin Penkin composed a handful of new tracks for Last Era, and all of them accompany the originals just nicely. He didn't compose many new tracks though, so much of Last Era's OST will be reused from Var Commons. Maybe that's why Last Era doesn't get his own section on Kevin's website, but I digress. Inaga Nagi also returned to sing the vocals for the OP and ED. It's also worth adding that much of the assets made for Var Commons were reused for Last Era, but I'm very pleased to report that the quality of the new assets matches the old ones and gels quite nicely. Now we're heading into the back half of this video review, so I'm now going to wrap up my thoughts on the fandisc more generally. In short, I love this fandisc. Last Era answers many of the questions I had about the world while reading Var Commons, while also deepening the relationships with all the characters. It's lovely seeing these characters from a variety of backgrounds become friends and lovers, as they engage with the world and the various moral and ethical dilemmas it presents. If anything, various revelations learnt throughout Last Era make the world even more interesting. Last Era is almost as long as Var Commons itself and is a lot meatier than your average visual fandisc, so you'll definitely be getting your money's worth if you pick this up. Fortunately, due to the open-ended structure of Last Era, you can skip character routes and content you don't gel with following the prologue, like I mentioned earlier. So, what will the future of the Norn 9 franchise be? At this point, I believe the series is officially finished. We've got 2 great games, the yin to the yang, the fire esper to the water esper, the Switch cartridge in the Switch case, you get the point. It's worth noting there is a 3rd Norn 9 title available in Japanese, which came out in 2016 exclusively for the PS Vita, Norn 9 Act Tune. So technically this franchise is a trilogy, but why am I treating it as a duology? Firstly, from what I've heard, Act Tune has a fairly middling reception, And secondly, Automate hasn't brought a title to Switch or mobile phones like the other two titles, most likely due to its middling quality. Maybe we'll get a fan translation in the future, as the Vita fan translation scene is increasingly booming, but who knows. If it does happen though, I'll definitely check out Actune. Or if my Japanese gets good enough to read it, I need to get back on the books. Like all Automate games, I'd also love to see this duology ported to PC as well down the line. Technically Var Commons is on Steam in Chinese, but it is region locked to Taiwan and other Southeast Asian countries, so if you live outside these regions you can't actually buy it, and it's still de facto exclusive to consoles. Now I'm going to wrap up on the Nor9 franchise more generally, and I love this franchise. It strikes a balance between plot and romance, is a highlight of all of Automate's romance heavy titles, and is still memorable even after all these years. It's both wholesome and fascinating at the same time, and given its light on potentially triggering content, makes it an easy recommendation for me. I definitely recommend reading Last Era if you were a fan of Var Commons. If you haven't read through Var Commons yet, go read that first. If you enjoy these kinds of games, you owe it to yourself to check out this iconic franchise.